Well, hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Dan Levin, and this is Essential Questions. Louis Charles Levin, no relation to me, was the first Jew elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Born in November of 1808, his education and background are unclear, though he practiced law in various communities throughout the South. Eventually, he made his way to Philadelphia and was a founder of the Native American Party. He was an anti-Catholic crusader who fomented mistrust and discrimination against immigrants, accusing Irish Catholics of trying to create a beachhead in America for papal interference. And he served 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. David Levy Yulee also vies for the title of the first Jewish member of Congress. A railroad tycoon called the father of Florida railroads, he was born David Levy in St. Thomas and adopted the name Yulee in honor of his Moroccan ancestors. He was the first Jew in the United States Senate, and while he converted to Christianity, he faced antisemitism throughout his career. Neither one of these characters would get my vote today. Levin was a xenophobic nativist who was accused of trying to bribe his way to a U.S. Senate nomination, and then later went completely insane and died in a sanitarium in 1860. Yulee was a strong advocate of slavery, which he used to farm his sugar plantation and to build his railroads. Nonetheless, both exemplified the spirit of what Jews brought to America, a deep sense of commitment to their country and supporting the American project. Today, there are 25 Jewish members of Congress and 10 Jewish senators. That's quite extraordinary, given that Jews make up less than 2.5% of all Americans. Jewish members of Congress today sit across the political spectrum, from deeply conservative to profoundly liberal. The call to service in Jewish tradition is strong. The Pirkei Avot teaches, Al tifrosh min hatzibur, do not separate yourself from the community. The values that come from Jewish tradition impel us to work for justice, to do all we can to help the needy and the vulnerable, and to work for common prosperity and mutual protection. Jewish members of Congress, like all members of Congress, face a number of challenges. First, they have to represent the interests of their constituents, especially in a manner that will win their support. They also have to do what they think is best for their party and balance that with what they think is best for the country. But at the same time, they cannot forget who they are and where they come from. And for Jewish members of Congress, their bonds with the Jewish people in America and Israel and around the world also pull on their heartstrings. In the midst of the government shutdown, Americans' approval rating for Congress is now at 15%, down from an average in just the mid-20s. And with all the challenges facing members of Congress, we often forget that they are 435 individual Americans from all walks of life who have been invested with remarkable duties and responsibilities to serve as representatives in a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And so to help us understand what it's like to be a Jewish member of Congress, we are blessed today to have with us Representative Jared Moskowitz, who represents Florida's 23rd District, where Temple Bethel of Boca Raton resides. Moskowitz was born on December 18, 1980 in Coral Springs, Florida, and graduated from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. He earned his bachelor's in political science from George Washington University and then his law degree from Nova Southeastern University. Representative Moskowitz served 3 terms in the Florida House of Representatives, and in December of 2018, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis named him director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management. As director, he navigated Florida's response to multiple crises, 2 hurricane seasons, and the COVID-19 pandemic. And during the pandemic, he oversaw the distribution of personal protective equipment, vaccines, and testing supplies. He was elected to Congress in 2022 and is now in his 2nd term. He serves on the House Committee for Foreign Affairs and the House Judiciary Committee. Representative Moskowitz, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Rabbi. Appreciate the opportunity.
So tell us, you grew up in Coral Springs. What was it about your upbringing and your Jewish upbringing that inspired you to public service?
Well, growing up, my dad always made sure that I understand what it was like to be Jewish, and it was important to instill those values. And I went to Hebrew school as a kid, but I think probably more importantly was the stories I heard from my grandparents. My mom's mother was part of the kinder transport out of Berlin, her and her sister. Her husband, my grandfather, was the sole survivor of his family out of Poland from the pogroms. His entire family, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was killed. He was the sole survivor. And then, listening to their stories and then coming to America and my dad's family who just escaped Czechoslovakia just in time before what happened there. So I think that made me understand why it was important to identify as Jewish culture, understand the importance of Israel, why it was created, and that even though I grew up in pretty calm, good times for the Jewish people, understanding why we always had to remain vigilant.
So, what was it in your background that made you choose a career in public service?
Well, that I think was just my upbringing in that I grew up in a very political household. My dad was very involved politically. And so I was fortunate. I had congressmen and senators, presidents in and out of my house. I had the previous two gentlemen who represented the district, Robert Wexler and Ted Deutsch, coming to my house when I was, much younger. And I was interested in the fact that, they had a seat at the table. They were in the room when these decisions were being made to help the American people. And so that's really what exposed me to it. It was my dad exposing me to all of these individuals. And so I wanted to be in Washington, D.C. I had a fascination about D.C. and the Capitol and being the center of government. And so I went to college in D.C. I went to GW. I wound up interning in the last year of the Clinton administration, my freshman year in college. And then, after finishing my time in college, I worked on Lieberman's presidential campaign for a short period of time and then came home to Florida. My dad wanted me to become a lawyer and go to law school, which I did. But then in my second year of law school, I came to my dad with this idea. I'm like, Dad, what if I ran for the local city commission? Thinking my dad would tell me to shut up and focus on law school. And it was the opposite. He was super supportive. And so at 24 years old, I started running for my local city commission in the city of Parkland. And I got elected at 25. I won that election by 22, 23 votes and became the youngest elected official in the state of Florida at the time of getting elected. And then obviously the rest is history. And, I found, serving in local government, serving in county government, 2 different stints in state government, one in the state house, one as the director of emergency management for a governor of the opposite party. And now in Congress, you are able to help people at different areas. Local government, you're helping people in sports fields and you're helping them making sure the roads are safe, police, fire. State government, you're setting state policy. Obviously, I helped respond after the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting event at my high school in my district by passing the Marjory Stoneman Douglas School Safety Act. So I helped make sure Florida was the safest state in the nation on school safety, and we still lead on that. And now, obviously, being in D.C., dealing with federal issues and affecting policy and helping people at the federal level. Not to mention when I was the director of emergency management, helping people through COVID, leading the entire state through that effort.
I think there is something in our culture that kind of inspires us to want to make a difference. I grew up in Washington, D.C., in the Maryland suburbs, and I also had that incredible fascination. There was something magnetic about Capitol Hill. And I also did a few internships on Capitol Hill when I was in college, and I really thought actually that might be a path that would be for me, though I remember a mentor of mine saying to me, because I thought I was going to do journalism, he said, Dan, you have to decide if you want to be a newsmaker or a news writer. And which side of the microphone do you want to be on? And I just remember just in that conversation thinking about that need to make a difference. And what I think is interesting is that in your career, you haven't hesitated to buck your own party when you thought that was the right thing to do. You, as you said, had worked for the DeSantis administration, though you were certainly, obviously, a Democrat in the state government. What is it that inspires you to sort of reach across the aisle or to work in tandem with people who are not in your party or who are not your natural allies?
Well, first let me say, I'm not saying it's easy, right? You make it sound easy. Yes, I do have a knack for it. I'm interested in it, but it isn't easy, right? Taking my political hat off and going to work for the governor, even though I thought it would be beneficial to Floridians and I could do a nonpartisan job and help people in their time of need after disasters, didn't make it easy. Governor, I got along well on a personal basis, but we had massive political policy differences. I don't know. I'm an old school guy. I think my dad, who was a big Democrat, my dad was probably to the left of me a little bit, but my dad had a lot of Republican clients as a lawyer, and he had a lot of Republican friends. And my dad just never blended his personal beliefs with business. He didn't blend his personal beliefs with his friends. And that was what I grew up under. Now we live in a very different time where everything's political. Politics has infected everything we do, everything we eat, everywhere we go, our friends, our algorithms, our families, you name it. And, I just don't subscribe that I can't be friends with someone that I just don't agree with. But that doesn't challenge me. I say it this way, right? It doesn't take any political ability to go into a room of 100 people and tell them exactly what they want to hear. That's not like a skill. That's easy to do, right? I can go right now to my kids and tell them exactly what they want to hear. Candy, free candy for you, and we'll go to the movies, and then we'll go play video games, and then we'll go to the store and buy stuff. Oh, that's not hard. It's hard to tell them no and then negotiate with my kids. And so, for me, I'm interested in going to a room of people I don't agree with and trying to hash out and get to a solution. And that's, I think, my emergency management background also, is that when it comes to a hurricane, it doesn't affect Democrats or Republicans, and you have to solve problems, right? It affects everyone together, affects communities. And so when I'm trying to solve problems, when I'm trying to multitask, I just solve the problem, put out the fire, help that person, help this person. And so for me, I kind of approach politics that way. And I'm not saying it's not becoming harder and harder. It's becoming almost impossible, quite frankly. But yeah, I want to sit down with a Republican and figure out, okay, yeah, we disagree on this, but where do we agree? What do we have in common? How can we get to a solution? I still think that's what the overwhelming majority of Americans want, even though they may not be the primary voter who doesn't want Democrats to work with Republicans or Republicans to work with Democrats. So they may not be the online voter who, sees the side as the enemy. I just don't view it that way. I also understand that my way of doing it is becoming like the dinosaurs.
And it's a shame that that's the case, because I agree. I think the vast majority of people really want their members of Congress to go over to the other side and say, where can we work together?
Well, that's life, right? That's life. If you work in a business, you have to work with people you disagree with, right? But you have to do that.
If you want to live in community, you got to live with people that you disagree with.
Yeah.
There's a passage in the Talmud where 2,000 years ago, you had their version of Jewish Republicans and Democrats. You had the folks that followed Hillel and the folks that followed Shammai, and they hated each other. I mean, there were even, the Talmud reports, violent confrontations sometimes between them. And at the same time, they said this amazing phrase that they captured in Pirkei Avot. They said, Kol machloket shehi lehem shamayim hi sofa lihitkayem, that the wisdom that comes from a dialogue or argument for the sake of heaven endures. And even when they were most at each other, they all said, oh yeah, my kid can marry your kid. And they never lost that sense of kinship. Though I wonder, what's it like being in the House of Representatives today? Specifically, what's it like being Jewish in the House of Representatives today?
Yeah, I'm going to separate those because I think while they're similar, they're slightly different angles. First of all, being in the House today is horrible. It is not what it was when I would go visit in college or visit as a kid. It's just not that place. The giants are gone. They've been replaced by lesser people. Finding compromise is a dirty word. We don't look at each other as Americans. People look at each other as the enemies, emboldened by 24-hour news coverage, the grifters online that make money off division, social media that's weaponized by foreign governments to try to get us fighting with each other, try to get our government to be incapacitated. And you're seeing that result in Congress. I mean, we're supposed to be an equal branch of government, and we're not even in Washington anymore. We're just at home. Which, don't get me wrong, I appreciate the time with my children. They appreciate it too, but that's not the job I signed up for. We're supposed to be in D.C. And so it is exactly what you think it is. What you see, what you view, you see the disagreement, you see the division, you see us doing nothing. We're in the least productive Congress in 100 years, and we're only beating the last Congress, which was also the least productive Congress in 50 years. And so I actually think that's a dangerous place, because if we look at the executive branch and we think the executive branch is out of control, Part of that reason is Congress. We've given all the power to the executive branch. We don't challenge them. We let them do it, right? When Democrats have the White House, the Democratic Congress doesn't challenge them. When the Republicans have the White House, the Republican Congress doesn't challenge them. And they let more and more power go to the executive, more and more rulemaking in the bureaucracy, less lawmaking in Congress. And now we even have the executive branch talking about how they can decide how to spend the money Congress appropriates, which is literally our most constitutional power in Congress, is that we are the appropriators.
So what does that do to you emotionally, spiritually, when you get up and go to work every day? How does working in that kind of an environment, as someone who went to Washington to try to make a difference, how does that impact you?
Well, you fight through it, right? I mean, again, I'm a little different, right? My background's in emergency management, so I thrive in chaos. Like for me, I know how to organize that. I know how to use it. I know where to find the points to break through and still find common ground at the same time. But yeah, look, we're not productive as a unit. Democrats and Republicans as a unit, we're not productive. We are basically a giant communication tool, little PR offices rather than legislative. And so that's what it's like to just be in Congress in general. That doesn't mean you're not helping a lot of people in the district. It doesn't mean I'm not solving problems for people who are trying to get their Social Security checks or their veterans benefits or their Medicare and Medicaid. It doesn't mean I'm not voting on stuff up there or fighting for the things I care about. It's just when it comes to productivity compared to other Congresses, we are light years away of what Congress used to be like. You know, being Jewish in Congress is a whole different experience. You know, obviously, since October the 7th, I think there's been a dramatic impact on what it's like to be Jewish in Congress. And it cuts political. There's a lot more Jewish representatives on the Democratic side than there are on the Republican side, but both sides are starting to experience the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment. Randy Fine is experiencing that from some of his Republican members, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie. He's seeing that as a Republican, and I get it on my side of the aisle. Sometimes we feel ostracized. Sometimes we feel like somehow our positions are not equal as others. Sometimes I think, you know, as the vocal minority drowns us out on certain things. But I also think it's person specific. I don't think it's caucus specific. And so, you know, look, I work, as do many of the others, to try to talk to my colleagues, to try to break through some of that stuff. Some people, it's not possible, right? It's just that this stuff's a deal breaker. But, you know, look, just like there's racism within the halls of Congress, there's anti-Semitism in the halls of Congress. There are people there that believe I'm a dual citizen, which is a ridiculous thing.
Do you think that members of Congress have a good understanding of what the reality is in Israel, of the complexity of the conflict, of what the state of Israel actually is and what it's like to live over there, what they're trying to achieve and the challenges they face? Talk to your colleagues about Israel. To what degree do they have really good awareness of the reality?
I think a lot of members do. Obviously, members on like foreign affairs or armed services, those who focus on foreign policy, I think have a greater depth of that issue. Those maybe who have just followed foreign policy, even if they're not on the committee, do. Intelligence, committee. And so I think there are a lot of members that do on both sides of the aisle have that. And then, yeah, they may not, because it may not be their issue. It may not be an issue that their district cared about, or it may not be an issue that they're educated on, or just may not be their issue. But, you know, look, just don't think Congress is any different than the American people. Don't think Congress is any different than a college campus. They're very influenced by what they read online, true, false, propaganda, and all in between.
Are you able, through building relationships with other members, to kind of break through the noise?
Yeah. Politics is still a relationships business. It has always been a relationships business. It is still a relationships business. And so, look, there are people on the left that I fundamentally disagree with, but actually that I have great personal relationships with. And the same is true on the right, right? There are members on the right that, good God, I mean, I some of the stuff that comes out of their mouth, a little vomit comes up and I re-swallow it. But actually, they're super nice to me, and we have good personal relationships. Helps get on each other's bills, right? We put some of that stuff aside and talk about, again, the things we have in common. So yeah, it's still a relationships business. There are still those relationships in Congress, not as much as there used to be, but there are still those relationships in Congress. You don't see them on television because it's not incentivized on television. You don't see it on social media because it's not incentivized on social media. In fact, we hide it more often than not because we don't want to take the incoming about how could you be friends with that person? How could you talk to that person? So that's why you don't see it. You see what sells, which is division.
It's interesting. I saw recently a political advertisement from Utah. I think these two guys are running for governor there. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. And they took out a joint ad where they sat down in front of the cameras together and they said, "Hi, my name is so-and-so and I'm running, and this is my opponent, so-and-so, and he's running. And we disagree on a million things, but we agree that we want what's best for the citizens of Utah. And no matter which one of us wins, you are going to work together to try to support them in their work. And we both approve this message." And I thought it was an amazing step for me, and when I look at the world, in the right direction of, I wonder if people would actually get bumps if they saw their member of Congress actually reaching across the aisle to collaborate on things to try to move an agenda forward that was good for their district or for their state or the country at large.
Well, I think, first of all, Utah politics are very interesting. They're almost in a brand of its own. You can see that based on the people who have come out of Utah that represent Utah. It's not as political. That has to do with the culture there, which I think is great. I like that brand of politics. Even the Republicans that have come out of Utah are much more moderate than the Republicans coming out of other areas. Don't partake in the flame throwing and the gaslighting that goes on. Not interested in that. Understand that while it might be politically rewarding, it's terribly damaging to the country. And I think the answer to that is you see that from certain people. It might work in Maine. It might work in New Hampshire, right? It's certainly not going to work in Mississippi, right? And so I think it's specific. You know, if you represent a plus 60 Democratic district, good luck talking about bipartisanship. It isn't going to work. If you represent a plus 60 Republican district, good luck about talking about bipartisanship. They're not interested. Right, we've just weaponized this to the nth degree, and they're foaming out the mouth about the other party. But if you represent a plus 3 district, whether it's Democrat or Republican, more moderate district, then that those voters will reward you working across the aisle. They will do that.
So you were in Congress on October 7th, and you have been representing a district that's fairly, if strongly Jewish. So when you see the erosion of support for Israel on both sides of the aisle, but certainly in your own party, how does that impact you? Does it worry you to see Israel becoming a wedge issue? Do you think that there are things that we in the Jewish community can do to try to heal that divide that's beginning to form or continue to rupture? What's it like being a pro-Israel member of Congress in this moment?
Well, I am very worried. I got young kids, and so I'm very worried about what's going on, where we're headed. I'm happy that the war is on a path to conclusion. I think it's needed to get there for a long period of time, quite frankly. I think it's gone on too long, and I think it's caused a lot of damage to Israel standing in the world, and I think it's caused a lot of damage to Jews around the world. And if people don't believe that, just go look at the numbers, right? The data does not lie. Israel was attacked on October 7th. It was a horrific attack. They had a right to defend themselves. And I'll give you a comparison. If Mexico had gone into Texas and killed 1,300 people, and then on the way out took 250 kids from the University of Texas, you can be rest assured we probably would have dropped a nuclear bomb on Mexico. If not, we would have just invaded them. Okay, look what we did in Afghanistan. Look what we did in Japan after World War II. That was a massive attack on the country. And so it was going to have a massive response. The idea that you pick on a country with more capabilities, right, and you're going to get more overwhelming force. Israel has more capabilities than Gaza does. This idea that we have to have a proportionate response, that's not a thing in war. But I do think that significant damage has been done to the Jewish community as a result of the propaganda that foreign governments have fed to kids on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. There is absolutely no doubt about that. And don't get me wrong, there's tremendous suffering in Gaza. I'm not saying that's propaganda. Tremendous suffering in Gaza. A lot of innocent people have been killed. But the propaganda is calling it a genocide, right? The propaganda is showing pictures of Gaza, and it's not Gaza. It's Syria. It's what Assad did. It's not giving any context about how Assad gassed his own people and killed hundreds of thousands of people. That wasn't a genocide, right? Or what the Uyghurs are doing in China, or what's happening in the Congo, where people are getting gunned down door to door, ethnic cleansing. That's a genocide. That's where the propaganda is. I also think, quite frankly, that we have to be honest. People say you can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic, and I would surmise that you could, in theory, but most of these people are just not. They're just not. When you saw the protests in New York on college campuses, holding signs "Go back to Poland" has nothing to do with that being anti-Netanyahu. Has everything to do with about being anti-Semitic. And so, chanting "River from the sea," what does that mean? Well, that means no Israel. Okay, well, what do you do with that? What do you do with all those people? You're going to kill them? And so I think that there is a dramatic amount of anti-Semitism that has always existed that now feels comfortable to come out covered under the umbrella of being anti-Netanyahu or anti-Zionism. I mean, tomorrow, if Netanyahu retired, all of a sudden, all these people are going to be pro-Israel? We know the answer, right? All of a sudden, if Netanyahu went away, they're going to be pro-Zionist? And so this is the new reality. There are changes in Europe based on immigration. I mean, I would tell you, I think Israel is more popular in the Middle East than they are in Europe. It's a fascinating thing to contemplate. And that doesn't mean Israel hasn't made mistakes. Israel's not perfect. I think they've made mistakes. I think we're going to have to deal with the consequences of those mistakes. The United States has made plenty of mistakes in the prosecution of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, now we're going to have to figure out how do we get out of that? It's kind of like, it reminds me of COVID. Remember how fast we went up on cases? We went right up. The graph looked like that. And then it plateaued, and then it came down ever so slowly. The question is, have we plateaued? Or is anti-Semitism still increasing? I think that has a lot to do with whether the war is going to be fed to people every single day on their newsfeed. Again, it's the only war that's fed to them. The Ukraine war is not fed to them, where 1 million people have died, right? What's happening in the Congo is not fed to them. What's happening in China is not fed to them. Only this war is fed to them. But the question is, will we plateau when the war is over and not fed to them anymore? Probably yes, we will. The question is, how soon will the anti-Semitism simmer down? Or how much of this is now metastasized? How much of this is now systemic? I think the brainwashing of young people in college who are addicted to their device, spent a lot of time of it on COVID. We've let the Chinese just pour stuff right into their brain. China can't beat us militarily. They got one aircraft carrier. But what they can do is they can weaponize the American kid, the next generation. China thinks about not the next year, they think about the next 100 years. And so, the Jewish community has a real problem around the world and America. And it's beyond just Israel, right? Like, again, if Israel went away tomorrow, and there are Jews who believe this, that, if Israel just went away, we would be fine. Well, how did that work out for us in World War II? There was no Israel. We weren't just fine. How has that worked out for us for 6,000 years before there, this idea that, if it just went away, we would be good. There wouldn't be anti-Semitism. Yeah, okay. Good luck. I tell my colleagues I tell them all the time, like, look, I get it. It's great to be sympathetic to what's going on in Gaza. People are suffering. But if you think somehow giving in to the mob and changing your position, just be careful. When Jews were put in boxcars, they didn't check your policy affiliation.
Right. So, you talked a little bit about your challenges and the frustrations of the lack of comedy among your colleagues and things. What is that gives you the greatest reward from your service? What is it that, when you look at your experience in Congress, makes you get up in the morning and say, I feel so good about what I was able to accomplish?
It's a great question. And you know what? It's the local stuff, believe it or not. People don't realize how many local problems we solve in Congress through our district offices. So it's running into the veteran who couldn't get his veteran benefits that I solved for him. It's running into the person who didn't get their Social Security for 10 months until I solved that problem. It's running into the person who was having stuff not approved by Medicare that I got approved, the surgery, right? It's solving a problem, someone who's stuck in another country having a passport issue. It is actually helping one constituent one moment at one time over and over and over and over again. That actually, I think, is what gives me the most reward, because I know I'm meeting the person that I helped. Sometimes I don't even know that I helped them until I meet them. I got an email. I solved the problem. You helped my brother. You helped my cousin. You helped my grandfather. There's a lot of reward in that. Sometimes that gets lost in the policy fights. You vote on a bill, and yes, it's a policy. You know it's going to help people, but you don't necessarily get to meet those people it helps. Whereas the stuff you're doing in district really is helping certain specific individuals. And I find it to be tremendously rewarding. And then, listen, I'm out there, again, from the Jewish community standpoint, I'm out there fighting the fight all day, trying to protect the Jewish community. After Ted Deutsch left, I always knew this was an important issue. It's important to me growing up. It was important to the district. Ted Deutsch, Robert Wexler, Ron Klein have had pieces of these district, all pro-Israel folks. But, I didn't know October 7th was going to happen. I didn't know we would be on the forefront of fighting a messaging war, of fighting for the Jewish community. And so I think doing that is tremendously important, which is why I've been so vocal on the issue. And not just voting, but going to the camera and talking about it.
I appreciate that. I think one of the things that sometimes gets lost amongst Americans is they forget that the 435 members of Congress are actually people who are also trying to raise their kids and who are also trying to do what they think is best for the country, and that they have their own needs as people. I think we sometimes caricature members of Congress, which makes it so difficult for you to do the work that you need to do. As you sort of look forward in this fraught moment, in this opportunity, looking forward in the midst of your service halfway through this term, what are there things that give you hope? What are the things that you think there might be light at the end of the tunnel in terms of where we're going as a country?
Well, I don't know that you want to ask me that question. I don't know that I have a lot of great news to report. I mean, look, I really do think things are going to get worse before they get better. I mean, if I'm just being honest, I see, and this shutdown is indicative of it, right? I mean, if I take a look at what the president just did on making the deal with Hamas, getting the hostages out, which I supported, of course. The president was willing to talk to Hamas and make a deal with Hamas, but he's not willing to sit down with Democrats and make a deal with Democrats on healthcare, right? That is where we are right now, that the administration found it easier to talk to Hamas than it is to talk to Democrats. There's no political reward to talk to Democrats, is how they view it. And so I think things are very broken right now. I think we're $38 trillion in debt. I don't think we're serious about solving that problem. And I don't think we recognize how much pain Americans are going through from an affordability issue. I think we talk about it, we weaponize it, we use it, but we're not trying to solve it. I like to solve problems. I don't think Congress likes to do that. People like to say we don't solve diseases anymore. We don't cure it. We just give you medicine to live with it because that's where the money is. I think Congress really doesn't solve issues anymore. They use the issues to raise money. They use the issues to win elections, but they don't solve. We could have solved immigration a long time ago, but then you couldn't raise money off of it. And so, I don't have, at this juncture, in the short term, right? I think the next 3 years, there's nothing good from, are we going to turn back the partisan divide? I think that's maybe a post-Trump presidency issue. Trump's brand of politics was base elections. It was getting people angry. It was dividing us. It worked from an electoral standpoint, but it has amplified in dramatic ways. And then the social media grifters all figured out how to make money off of it, dividing people, getting them angry. I don't know if we turn back the clock, but I think it gets worse before it gets better.
Are there things that you can do as a leader to try to bend the curve back towards a more productive civility in politics?
Well, that's going to be up to the voter, really. The voter has to reward the elected official for that civility, rather than rewarding the elected official for the division. We're a very responsive bunch. That shouldn't surprise you. It shouldn't surprise anyone that we want to win re-election and stay where we're at if we want to stay in Congress or in the Senate. So we're going to do and sell the product that we think the voter is telling us they want. If the voter was telling us more that they wanted us to sit down, then you're going to see that response from the elected. But so long as the voter isn't doing that, then you're going to see the elected respond to the voter.
I think there's an idea in politics, right, that in democracies you get the government you deserve. And I think that you're right, that it's important not to put all of the blame on Congress for the dysfunction, but on the Americans who send their representatives to Congress. And if the American people sent their members to Congress with the message and the mission, hey, we want you to get stuff done. We want you to work across the aisle. We want you to collaborate and compromise and do what's right for the nation. I think you're right that we could get a better government.
Well, a lot of this is our fault, though, because it's built on the disdain that the American people have for us as a Congress, have for us as elected officials, and because there's real problems going on in society that we're not solving. Real equality issues, real economic equality issues, healthcare issues, and so we're not solving these issues. The wealthier is getting wealthier, income equality gaps are larger, and so I think there's real anger, real disdain. I would say that I think it used to be the American people would see a fire and they'd want to send someone with a bucket of water to put the fire out. Now I think there are a lot of American people that see a fire and they want to send someone with gasoline rather than water.
Well, I have to tell you, I appreciate your candor and your passion and your willingness to go into that fight and to be a voice of reason and someone who can try to advance things in a proper and a productive way and constructive way. And as one of your constituents, I'm rooting for you and wish you a lot of good luck and blessings of success.
Well, I appreciate it. It's good to talk with you.
The Essential Questions podcast has been made possible by the Temple Beth El Jewish Ideas Incubator, committed to creativity and innovation in modern Jewish life. Many thanks to our production team. You can find this podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, and the Podbean app, as well as on Temple Beth El's website, tbeboca.org/essential questions. Share this podcast with your friends. Rate us on Apple Podcast or Spotify to spread the word. And we want to know, what are your essential questions? Let us know by emailing us at eq@tbeboca.org. I'm Rabbi Dan Levin, and thanks for listening to the Essential Questions podcast.